Welcome back to News Year 2011. In the second half of the year, there was a continuation of bad news for our military and the beginning of the hunt for answers to New Zealand's Pike River mine tragedy.
July began with Angus Houston standing aside as Defence Force Chief. His final message was an upbeat assessment of the war in Afghanistan.
The most exciting part of my job has been to go out and engage those wonderful people of the Australian Defence Force.
He's a man who's proved worthy of every responsibility he's been given.
On the 5th of July, Australia was again mourning another soldier death in Afghanistan. Sergeant Todd Langley became the 28th digger to die there. The following day, a breakthrough for the live cattle industry, with the government lifting a month-long ban on exports to Indonesia.
Tonight I can announce the government has lifted the suspension on live exports to Indonesia.
The long-awaited Royal Commission into New Zealand's Pike River tragedy began on the 11th of July. The families of the miners were told their patience would be tested over the coming months. Mid-month, News Corp chief Rupert Murdoch spoke out in defence of his company over the British phone hacking scandal. It followed a change of heart about giving evidence to a parliamentary committee.
Founder of the company, I was appalled to find out what had happened.
On the 18th of July, former swimmer Simon Crowley was awarded a $180,000 payout over Nick Darcy's face-shattering punch. Darcy wasn't in court, missing the judgment to resume his swimming career in LA. A businessman and his pilot were killed when their helicopter crashed on Sydney's upper north shore. Very little was left of the chopper, which came down in bad weather near Turramurra. In late July, after months of negotiating, the federal government finally signed off on its refugee swap deal with Malaysia. The Prime Minister said it would smash the people smuggling business, but critics of the deal said human rights would be sacrificed. After more than a year of haggling, August began with a deal finally being done between the Commonwealth and the States on health reform. On the 3rd of August, Sydney teenager Madeline Pulver had a fake bomb strapped to her neck. Less than 2 weeks later, police made a breakthrough and a man was arrested in the United States. On the 8th of August, the High Court extended an injunction banning any asylum seekers being deported under the Malaysia deal for at least 2 weeks. On the same day, Mike Rann ended speculation about his future, saying he would step down as South Australian Premier on the 20th of October.
You're laughing. I'm laughing at you.
You're laughing at me.
5 months after she was found guilty of killing her brother-in-law, gangland matriarch Judy Moran was jailed for a minimum 21 years. On the 12th of August, tens of thousands of people turned out in Melbourne to welcome home Tour de France champion Cadel Evans.
It's just been a great ride and it's not over yet.
A 41-year-old man was arrested and charged over the murder of Queensland teenager Daniel Morecambe. 2 weeks later, DNA tests would confirm that bones found in bushland were those of Daniel. 3 ABC newsmen died in a helicopter crash on the 18th of August. Tributes were flowing for Paul Lockyer, Gary Ticehurst and John Bean, who were aboard the chopper that went down near Lake Eyre in outback South Australia. On the 22nd of August, an Australian soldier serving in Afghanistan was killed in action, Australia's 29th fatality since the war began. Private Matthew Lambert was killed by an improvised explosive device while on patrol northeast of Tarancot. And on the very last day of the month, the High Court killed off the government's refugee deal with Malaysia, the court declaring it unlawful. September began with the government still feeling the effects of the High Court ruling on the Malaysia refugee deal. Julia Gillard labelled the decision a missed opportunity and directed some pointed criticism at the Chief Justice.
His Honour, Mr Justice French, considered comparable legal questions when he was a judge of the Federal Court and made different decisions.
There was some relief for the government and MP Craig Thompson, with New South Wales Police abandoning any formal investigation into claims he misused a union credit card. But 24 hours later, the MP was facing renewed pressure as the Coalition again called on New South Wales Police to investigate him over fresh allegations of misusing union funds. On the 12th of September, Julia Gillard was refusing to give up on her Malaysia solution. She called on Tony Abbott to support the legislation when it was introduced to Parliament. In mid-September, the government announced an inquiry into Australia's media, looking at the future of print and online publications. It was firmly rejected by the opposition. On the 16th of the month, fire crews managed to control a major chemical fire in Canberra's northern suburbs. The explosive blaze in Mitchell raged for almost 12 hours. The government flatly rejected Tony Abbott's proposed changes to the Migration Act that would only allow offshore processing in a country that is a signatory to the UN Convention. Immigration Minister Chris Bowen called Mr Abbott's position hypocritical, saying the government would be introducing its own legislation to Parliament later in that same week. On the 27th of the month, the government announced women would be allowed to serve in all defence roles within 5 years, including the Special Forces. And a New Zealand Special Forces soldier was killed in Afghanistan in late September, the second to die in little more than a month.
In the last quarter of 2011, two important pieces of government legislation made it through the Parliament, while industrial action at Qantas saw the airline's boss playing hardball, and the US President finally got to visit Australia after several false starts.
In early October, Japan confirmed it was resuming whaling in the Southern Ocean. The Australian government condemned the decision. The Liberian-registered cargo ship Rena ran aground on a reef off the east coast of New Zealand's North Island. Oil and containers washed ashore on beaches near Taronga. A 14-year-old Australian boy was arrested for drug possession in Bali. A New South Wales Central Coast teen sent a desperate message to his family and friends from inside a Bali police station. The Prime Minister had a major victory on the 12th of October with her carbon tax legislation passing the House of Representatives. Julia Gillard celebrated with her front bench, even shared a kiss with Kevin Rudd. The Prime Minister's fortunes changed the following day, though. Faced with failure to get its migration changes through Parliament, the government announced it would move to onshore processing. Mid-month, ongoing industrial action forced Qantas to axe up to 100 domestic flights a week. Telstra shareholders voted to hand over the company's fixed-line network to the National Broadband Network. The $11 billion deal would see the telco progressively shut down its copper-based network and transfer its customers across to the NBN Co. On October 19, the Queen touched down in Canberra for her 16th Australian tour. On the 29th of the month, Qantas CEO Alan Joyce made an unprecedented announcement.
We are grounding the Qantas fleet now. Those flights that are currently in the air will complete their scheduled sectors. However, as from now, there will be no further Qantas domestic or international departures anywhere in the world.
2 days later, though, after Fair Work Australia ordered an end to all forms of industrial action, Qantas was flying again. November began tragically, with 8 asylum seekers dying when a boat sank off the Indonesian coast. The Minister for Border Protection said the tragedy underscored the need for a strong deterrent. A defence report released on the 3rd of November found that 3/4 of women at the Australian Defence Force Academy experienced sexual harassment. On the 7th of the month, Prime Minister Julia Gillard made a surprise visit to Australian troops in Afghanistan. The next day was an historic one, with the carbon tax legislation passing through the Parliament. On the 9th of November, 3 Australian and 2 Afghan soldiers were shot and wounded by a rogue Afghan National Army soldier. On the 16th, US President Barack Obama addressed the federal parliament, committing the US to a strong presence in the Asia-Pacific region.
As a Pacific nation, the United States will play a larger and long-term role in shaping this region and its future.
On the 18th of November, a fire at a Western Sydney nursing home ended up claiming the lives of 11 elderly residents.
The roof was on fire above them, so you can imagine what it would be like for elderly people in their night clothes, some of them confused, suffering from dementia, so it was a horrific scene.
A male nurse working at the Quakers Hill facility was charged with arson and murder. The government's mining tax legislation finally passed the lower house in late November after a long night of deal-making and debate. Fires swept through bushland between Margaret River and the coast in southern Western Australia, claiming about 40 homes. And the Australian teenager who bought drugs in Bali was let off lightly by an Indonesian judge on the 25th of November. The 14-year-old dodged a 3-month lockup, instead receiving a sentence of 2 months. So with time already served, he'd be home within 10 days. 1st of December, former Queensland and Australian Rugby League player and coach Artie Beetson died of a heart attack aged 66. He became the first Indigenous Australian to captain his country in any sport. In early December, the New South Wales teenager caught buying drugs in Bali finally arrived home. He'd spent 2 months in detention. For the second month in a row, the Reserve Bank lowered official interest rates by 0.25%. It took 2 days, but all 4 big banks caved into intense public and political pressure and passed on the cut. The Prime Minister defended Cabinet's decision to award the Australia Network contract to the ABC, despite 2 ongoing investigations into the process. Matthew Johnson was jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for killing gangland boss Carl Williams. The government opted not to slug overseas purchases made online with more GST. It said the move would actually cost more money than it would bring in.
The Australian retail industry should not regard the internet as some sort of big brown snake which has snuck into the kitchen and is a peril to the future of retail.
On the 12th of December, the Prime Minister announced a cabinet reshuffle that saw some of her key supporters rewarded with promotions. The winners included Bill Shorten, Tanya Plibersek and Mark Butler, with Robert McClelland and Kim Carr among the losers. On the 15th of December, federal politicians received a Christmas bonus, significant pay rises approved by the Remuneration Tribunal. Music guru Molly Meldrum fell and suffered critical injuries while hanging Christmas decorations at his Melbourne home. His family spoke of their anguish as they hoped for recovery. And towards the end of December, the world was on edge after the death of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il.
You've been watching News Year 2011. Whenever news breaks in 2012, we'll be here. Thanks for joining us.